It's the amazing Rico Brogna podcast with your host, Evan Roberts.
And happy Father's Day to all the dads out there. For the very first time this season, we as Met fans experience something we have not experienced. Winning a game on a Saturday and winning a game on a Sunday. Imagine that. That's how miserable of an experience most of the 2024 season has been. We never get that opportunity to just put our feet up and win on both weekends. And on this beautiful Father's Day weekend, the New York Mets put an exclamation point on an important homestand, a very successful homestand, and a homestand that will have us as Met fans now debate the question, which is, how sucked back in are you? Are you fully sucked back in? Are you moderately sucked back in? Are you like, sort of sucked back in? Or are you just highly skeptical that, yes, the Mets are playing really good baseball. Yes, the Mets have won 9 out of 11. You can't argue with those numbers. Yes, the Mets have won 11 of their last 15, if you want to go further back than that. But, I don't think they're very good. And I think for us as Met fans, we can debate that now for the next 24 hours until they take on the Texas Rangers on Monday night. But I will give you something we can all agree on. Whether you are in the party of being fully sucked back in, partially sucked back in, moderately sucked back in, or not sucked in at all, it feels damn good as a baseball fan to sit down, whether you are at Citi Field on Saturday and Sunday, whether you are watching on TV, whether you are barely checking on your phone, it feels damn good to watch your team win. And that's the one thing we could all agree on. Now, we'll get to the stuff we all disagree on, which is how we feel about this baseball team. Let's take a look at this series and what needed to happen and what happened. The Mets, coming off of what occurred in London, even though it was a split, and even though that win a week ago felt almost lucky, fortunate, however you want to describe it, they needed to come home against a bad Marlins team, a mediocre but a team you need to catch Padres team, and they needed to finally do damage at home. Because all season long, this has been a bad home team. Like, anytime they've gone on any kind of run and they've put together any kind of sustained winning, it's basically happened on the road all season long. Let's not forget, the Mets are an above 500 road team, which usually is a marker for success. So number one, they needed to come home and win series. I looked at the 12 games, the 6 at Citi Field they just completed, and then the 6 games they have coming up against the Texas Rangers and the Chicago Cubs, as a point of time where they needed to go 8-4. That was the number I mentioned here on the Rico. I mentioned it on the air. That gets you kind of back in it, if you will, or at least closer to 500. Well, so far, with 3-0 against San Diego and 2-1 against Miami, they've got 5-1. So based on my own kind of standards I set, that would mean all they've got to do on this 6-game road trip is go 3-3. And they have accomplished the goal of 8-4. But here's the funny thing about goals, good and bad. They change. They evolve. Once you go 5-1 against the Marlins and the Padres, and you peak out at an under 500 Cub team and an under 500 Texas team, you certainly look at these next 6 games and say, go get 4 of them. And then all of a sudden, you're talking about a 9-3 stretch, and you're talking about a team that could get within 2 games of 500. But we'll look ahead coming up a little bit later on. I'll also tell you about the roster move that to me seems so obvious that they should make over the next couple of days. But let's start off with what they did on Saturday and Sunday. We did a Rico recap in Friday's game. You can always go back and check the archives and check out what we said about that Friday night win. But you go to Sunday and you go to Father's Day. And there were a few incredibly encouraging things from this Sunday victory. Not only do they sweep a series, which is nice to do, not only do they beat the ass of a good starting pitcher, like they didn't pound a kid on Sunday. Dylan Cease is one of those reliably consistent starting pitchers. We talked about him during the offseason as a guy that would have been a great target. And Cease has had a very solid year this year. And considering the way the first inning went, with Tyler McGill getting the first 2 outs, walking Jurickson Profar, giving up a base hit to Drake Cronenworth, and then giving up a hit to Manny Machado when he was ahead of the count 1-2. It felt bad. Like, I'm sitting there at Citi Field on Sunday. That was the one game in this series I did go to. And I took my son and I took my dad. So there was generations of Roberts and my father-in-law as well. So a nice Father's Day, if you will, at Citi Field. But considering the way the top of the first inning went and looking at who they're facing on the mound and Dylan Cease, I ain't going to lie to you. I didn't feel good. I did not feel good. And I thought what was so important was how they responded in the bottom of the first inning. And I think this game on Sunday, you saw a lot of responding, as we'll get into. You've got Francisco Lindor hitting a home run. Francisco Lindor has had now, it feels like such an odd season because he'll have these 0 for 5s. He'll have these days in which he feels like the guy from April, but then he'll have really productive days. I mean, you look at game 2 of this series, the guy got on base 3 times. He did nothing in the first game of this series. You go back to the finale against Miami. He had one of the most important at-bats of the game when he drew a walk and stole second base right before the JD home run. But to see Lindor give you that pop and hit a bomb to right center field to instantly tie the game, instantly erase the mistakes of that first inning where Tyler McGill gave up a runs with 2 outs, that was a very good response moment. And then you look at Brandon Nimmo, who had an outstanding weekend. And maybe it's because I said something critical about him on the Rico 4 days ago. And by the way, it's funny. All I said about Brandon Nimmo was, hey, he's been bad. Hey, he's been slumping. Hey, even though Hoffman's point was so dumb about hitting him 9th, maybe he's going to be prophetic. And I'll tell you, the pro Nimmo people came out, citing his weighted runs created, citing how he hasn't been that bad. I mean, guys, he'd been bad. That's okay to admit. And I wasn't necessarily saying bat him 9th. I was more trying to give Pete some love and say, hey, Brandon's been struggling. But how about the weekend for Brandon Nimmo? 7 for 13. He was on base 8 times. Not bad. And that base hit in the bottom of the first inning on Sunday big, because now all of a sudden you tie the game at 1 and you're beginning a new rally. JD draws a walk in the midst of JD Martinez being as locked in as anybody, getting on base, 10 times in a row? And then maybe, and the key word is maybe, because a lot of times I will say, whether it's about the team or a player, boy, hopefully this leads to something. Pete Alonso hit a 3-run home run on the first pitch he saw from Dylan Cease, and I instantly started to think back to late in the game on Saturday when he ripped a double. And remember, he was in the midst of that 1 for 19 or whatever it was. And I thought, hey, could that double lead to him breaking out of it? Well, the signs are there because he hits the 3-run home run off of Dylan Cease in the first inning. He got a 2-run single later in the game, even though if Manny Machado wasn't ejected, it's probably eaten up and turned into a double play, but whatever. Not only does Pete hit a home run that gives the Mets a 4-1 lead on Father's Day against a good starting pitcher, but it makes you think maybe Pete is waking up. Because this lineup, if you've got not even a red-hot J.D. Martinez, but just this J.D. Martinez, and you've got a red-hot Pete Alonso, and Brandon Nimmo starting to wake up, and Marte's had a good offensive season, all of a sudden this lineup now goes from, hey, it's been pretty good lately, to dynamic. And look, it's been more than pretty good over the last few weeks. The numbers don't lie. But yet, there are still guys in this lineup who have not heated up, including Pete Alonso. So that home run in the bottom of the first inning was huge to me on so many levels. It was huge on the level of, hey, they're up 4-1 in the bottom of the first inning. What a response to McGill giving up that run in the top of the first inning. And then B, maybe this unlocks Pete Alonso. Maybe this gets him going. To Tyler McGill's credit, he started to pitch reasonably well. Had a big pickoff play in the second inning. Got an outstanding play out of Jeff McNeil, making a play up the middle. Had a nice clean 1-2-3 third. The other thing that was impressive about McGill is there were 2 outs and nobody on in the 4th inning. Small play in this game, but I thought it was significant. 2 outs and nobody on in the 4th inning. The Mets are up 4-1, and he's about to have an incredibly quick inning because David Peralta hits a routine ground ball to shortstop. Inning is over. And Tyler McGill now will have retired 7 in a row. He would have had a very nice, clean inning, low pitch count. Great. And Francisco Lindor made an error. Bad error. No defending it. Just booted it. And I thought to myself, and I said it to my dad, I explained it to my son, boy, that could be a huge error. It could be a huge error because not only could this open up San Diego to scoring runs, but this could bring McGill's pitch count up even higher and make him have to labor to get through this fourth inning. And who knows if he even gets through the fifth inning? I have no idea. And McGill, to his credit, against Ha-Sung Kim, very neatly and quietly threw 3 pitches and got a big ground out and got out of the inning. And that was big. A little tiny thing, but that was big. And it allowed the Met offense to do some more damage. Luis Torrens got a base hit. Harrison Bader, who's had a clutch here all year, hit that RBI double. Francisco Lindor drove in another run. And then there's J.D. Martinez again. There goes that man, as Mark Jackson would say, ripping one high off the right field wall. He is so locked in right now. So locked in. Going back to the home run he hit against the Marlins, to everything he did this weekend, J.D. Martinez in this series against San Diego went 6 for 9 at the plate with 5 walks. 5 walks. He was on base 11 times in this 3-game series against San Diego. He also drove in a ton of runs. I mean, he's basically their RBI masher. And he tapped in another one to make it 7-1. So it felt like a nice, easy win. It felt like a nice, fun day at the ballpark. I'm with my son and my dad and my father. I mean, what could be better than this? The weather's beautiful. It's actually a big crowd at Citi Field, relatively speaking. We're about to win 5 in a row. I mean, what could possibly go wrong? What could possibly go wrong? And then all of a sudden we saw it. We saw what could possibly go wrong. And even though the Mets are on a 5-game winning streak and we're all happy and we're all feeling good right now, I mean, I saw hell in that 8th inning. Didn't we all see hell in that 8th inning? First of all, I'm going to do some nitpicking. Can I do some managerial nitpicking? Is that okay? Adrian Hauser comes in to pitch the 6th inning. Okay, fine. Hauser has really adapted very well in this bullpen role. His numbers will never be good because he did so much harm to it with his struggles in the rotation. But coming out of the bullpen, Adrian Hauser has been outstanding in that Pat Mahomes, Darren Oliver, long man role. Trevor Williams from a few years ago, to give you a more recent connection, as opposed to Oliver and Mahomes from 20 plus years ago. He gives up a base hit to start the 8th inning, up in this game 7-2. And Mendy very quickly goes to the bullpen. Very quickly says, I got to get Jake Diekman in. I have to do it. And Jake Diekman immediately gets that little tapper right back to the mound and throws it into center field. And even though at the time it's 7-2 and the tying run isn't at the plate quite yet, did we not all see that throw into center field and think to ourselves, oh, God, they're not going to make this easy. This is going to be painstakingly awful. And then Jake Diekman, who made a good pitch and then makes the horrible defensive play, proceeds to walk Donovan Solano and Jackson Merrill back-to-back times. He stays in the game to take on David Peralta because he's a lefty, and by the grace of God, gets him to ground out, but a run scores. And San Diego set up because they got the tying run at the plate. They get him out of the game. They go to Drew Smith. That's the other thing I'm wondering about. Why? And by the way, what I was saying earlier is I wouldn't have been in a rush to get Hauser out of the game. Hauser had pitched well. I still have a 5-run lead when he gives up the base hit. Like, why am I necessarily rushing to get him out of the game? We also know that Adrian Hauser can go long. Like, you don't feel the need after 2+ innings to get him out of the game. So, don't necessarily agree with that. I also don't necessarily agree with Drew Smith being the guy to try to put the fire out against Ha-Sung Kim. And ahead of the count, 1-2, he gives up that 2-run double. Or 1-run double. I think 1 run scored on that play. And then Luis Campusano rips the crap out of one to center field that I thought Harrison Bader was going to overrun. Then he gives up a base hit to Luis Arraez. Luckily, the tying run doesn't score. And we're set up with 2-on-2 out. It's a 1-run freaking game against Fernando Tatis Jr. Did anybody think the Mets were holding on at that point? Or did this game feel like every other brutal loss we've experienced this season? Whether it was the Giants a few weeks ago when they blew the big lead on Friday, whether they're blowing it again on Saturday. I mean, we have such a smorgasbord of horrible losses to choose from that I don't have to just give you one, but it did not feel that way. Didn't it not feel that way? Oh, my God. Drew Smith shockingly strikes out Tatis Jr. Where the hell's Reed Garrett? Where's even Adam Ottavino at that point? Now, I don't know if I would have done Diaz because you're still kind of nursing Edwin back into this closer's role. So if this was a different time, if this was certainly 2 years ago, I may have said, hey, get Edwin Diaz in this game. Because remember, once Smith gives up the base hit to Arise, he's faced his 3 batters. You can get him out of the game. But credit to Drew Smith. He shockingly strikes out Tatis Jr. But what I was mentioning earlier was that bounce back, that response that the Mets showed. And with a 1-run lead in the bottom of the 8th inning and Edwin Diaz warming up and Edwin having pitched 3 out of the last 4 games, if he comes into this game, so it's 2 out of the last 3, and the heart of the order coming up, again, are we confident? Not really. I ain't confident. So for Luis Torrens to hit a home run in the 8th inning to give him a 2-run lead, for Jeff McNeil of all people, behind in the count to bloop that little double, for Harrison Bader to come through with a big single, for Brandon Nimmo to drive a run in, that was necessary. And then obviously Pete Alonso hitting that ground ball that if Manny Machado wasn't ejected, he puts in his pocket and turns into a double play. That was a big response. Because 1-run lead, 9th inning, heart of the order, Edwin Diaz on the mound. Who the hell knows? Like, I don't think we're out of the danger zone quite yet with Edwin Diaz. We're not there yet. And I'm sure he'll be tested, especially on this road trip. There will be a moment where he has to come in and get some big outs, and we'll see. I mean, let's not forget, not to knock Edwin Diaz, but I think we have to call it like it is. That 9th inning on Friday was not easy. He gives up a leadoff hit. It looked as if San Diego was going to tie the game off the bat at Donovan Solano, but Jeff McNeil made a great defensive play. It's not like Edwin Diaz came in and lit the world on fire. So we are still dealing with that kind of day-to-day agita of what we're going to get out of Diaz. But the reality is blowing it open with 4 runs to respond to their 4 runs in the bottom of the 8th inning, that was huge. And that allowed you to relax. It allowed Sean Reed-Foley to pitch the 9th inning and allowed us as Met fans to celebrate a 3-game sweep of the San Diego Padres. Wasn't easy, but a 3-game sweep of the San Diego Padres. Kudos to Starling Marte, as crappy defensively as he's been this year, made an outstanding diving catch in the 7th inning. I mentioned Jeff McNeil had some pretty good defensive plays. And overall, look, with Tyler McGill, 5 innings, 2 runs. I mean, that's a solid performance out of him. Obviously, you'd like to get more innings out of your starting pitching. I just don't think you're getting it out of a guy like Tyler McGill. We were talking on the Rico a few days ago. How do you picture McGill or David Peterson being in the future? Like, who do you give a better shot at being a back of the rotation guy? And honestly, I don't have really a lot of faith in either guy. I would rather see Christian Scott in this rotation. I get why he's not here right now, why we have to wait with all the off days and the fact that they're restricting his innings. But I think for Tyler McGill, a 5-inning, 2-run performance is, I don't want to say as good as it gets, because look, he will mix in like David Peterson did a couple of starts ago, that occasional brilliant performance. But 5 innings, 2 runs from Tyler McGill is fine. If you can score enough runs and your bullpen can be solid enough, you can make that stand up. And the Mets were able to make that stand up with a win on Sunday. Now on Saturday, we got to see, finally, we got to see good Jose Quintana. How good Jose Quintana showed up, and he delivered. And outside of a home run to Jackson Merrill in the 5th inning, he delivered 6, I'm not going to call it dominant innings, but 6 very sturdy Jose Quintana-like innings. What has been so disappointing about Quintana is when you looked at this Met rotation coming into the year, even prior to Kodai's injury, after Kodai's injury, Quintana was the guy that you could look at least I thought, and say, that's the most reliable. I mean, remember his 12 starts he made last year, or 13 starts that he made last year after he came back from injury. It felt like every game was essentially 6 innings, 2 runs. Every game. And that was fine. I mean, that was what you were getting out of him. And it was great. This year has been the complete opposite. He has been so wildly inconsistent. And we remember what happened in London. I mean, he's had so many bad starts, and this one was really good to see. Came out, worked through trouble in the first inning, had 1, 2, 3 innings in the second or third inning, got that great play by Brandon Nimmo, which was kind of cool down the left field line, then apparently signed the ball to the guy and said, thank you for not catching this, because he kind of gave Brandon Nimmo the runway to go into the crowd and make that play in the fourth inning. But 6 innings, 2 hits, 1 run. Marvelous performance out of Jose Quintana. But let us not forget how insanely frustrating the beginning of Saturday's game was. They're facing Adam Mazur, who's making his 3rd major league start. For whatever reason, Adam Mazur can't throw a strike. Can't throw a strike. And you saw it immediately when he walked Francisco Lindor to lead off the game. And Francisco Lindor immediately stole second base with Brandon Nimmo up, which I thought about the Rico, and I thought about those times we were talking about that lineup change being the one that made sense. Having Francisco Lindor lead off and Nimmo bat 2, because you give Lindor more opportunities to steal when you have a guy like Brandon Nimmo who's so selective in that 2-hole. And in that at-bat in the first inning, it worked. It worked to perfection. Nimmo gives you a quality at-bat before he strikes out. Lindor steals second base. And then JD walks. And they've got 2 on, 1 out. Alonso strikes out. DJ Stewart lines out. They do nothing. They get 3 more base runners in the second based on 2 more walks. Have the bases loaded. And Brandon Nimmo pops up. They get 2 more walks in the third inning. 2 on, 1 out. And Vientos and Alvarez can't bring him in. They left 7 guys on in the first 3 innings of this game. And Mazur had walked 6 guys. I mean, think about that. That'll be forgotten because the Mets came out and ended up scoring enough runs and winning. But how awful was the start to that game? You get 6 walks out of Adam Mazur, and they can't score a freaking run. That felt typical. And then when the offense finally came, it came out of absolute nowhere. 2 outs and nobody on. Double by Lindor. Double by Nimmo. JD goes yard. Boom, shakalaka, 3-0. But man, the offense came out of nowhere after they could not drive a run in with all those walks. But the story in this game was Jose Quintana, and it was JD Martinez, and it was Dednell Nunez. Those are your 3 stars hockey style. Quintana, like we mentioned, the 6 straight innings. JD continuing to be an RBI machine in the midst of this incredible run he's on. On Saturday, he was on base every time, 5 times. And what did the streak end up at? This is the beauty of having a scorecard. He got on base his last time on Friday, got on base 5 straight times on Saturday, so that's 6. And then he got on base 4 straight times on Sunday. So 10 consecutive plate appearances in which he got on base. Not too shabby. Not a bad little run from JD Martinez. So he continues to supply the offense. And Dednell Nunez continues to be a story. In April, it was Reed Garrett. And here in June, it is now Dednell Nunez who is establishing himself as one of their more reliable arms. Now, let's learn a lesson from this, okay? If you go back to April, Reed Garrett was a multi-inning guy. That's how we learned about him. There was a game against the Braves early in the season in which he pitched multiple innings, kept them in the game, allowed them to come back. Remember that? And so Reed Garrett was used for multiple innings. And then he was so good, we started to see the Mets say, hey, let's shorten him up and let's use him back-to-back days. At that point, and maybe it was a little bit after that, you started to see Reed Garrett struggle. Dednell Nunez is a little like Reed Garrett in that they've used him for multiple innings. You go back to that game on Saturday. He comes in the 7th, pitches the 7th, pitches the 8th. He too worked through a Francisco Lindor error. Credit to him. So maybe what the Mets need to do with Nunez, and they could go back to doing it with Reed Garrett too, is use these guys as multi-inning guys and not try to pitch them every single day. If you've got 2 guys that can be used in that role, plus you've got Adam Ottavino, who I guess you trust, and you have Drew Smith, who Carlos Mendoza acts like he trusts, and Sean Reed Foley, who is probably entering the circle of trust, hasn't been bad. You could afford to do that. So the lesson I've learned from Reed Garrett is Just stick with what's working with Dednell Nunez. When you use him in a game and he's effective, keep him in. Keep him in the game. No need to say you're done after one inning so we can use you tomorrow. Like, continue to maximize what's making Dednell Nunez great. Because right now he has been amazing out of the bullpen. The Mets have had two guys out of their bullpen. And I guess you could include Sean Reed-Foley to a degree. You want to use him as an example as well. You've had three guys that have essentially come out of nowhere and for the most part pitched very, very well. So he deserves a lot of credit too for the way he pitched in this game. But just a nice, clean victory, erasing the first three innings where they couldn't drive runs in. And I mentioned this earlier in the pod, the Pete Alonso double in the seventh inning after JD's home run where he just missed a home run. I thought in the moment, hey, maybe this could lead to something. Maybe this could lead to Pete waking up because Pete's too good to be struggling like this. He's had, for the most part, a down season. I think we'd all agree with that. You know, you kind of look at his numbers right now. He's on pace because the Mets have now played 70 games, so they're a little bit short of halfway. He's on pace to go about 32 home runs, 77 RBIs, 770 OPS. Like, those are all numbers that are way down from what we know he's capable of doing and what he's done in the past. But if he can get hot, and this is the hot streak where he can have a few weeks of being on fire to carry this team, A, his numbers will look a lot better, and B, more importantly, help this team win some games because they still have a lot of work to do. They have cut it to 4 games under 500, the closest they've been since, I think, the Cleveland series, going back a month. But they're a game and a half out of a wild card spot. I know people don't want to hear that, but it's okay to talk about. It's okay to mention that the Mets are hot right now. That's okay to say. They've won 5 in a row. They've won 9 out of 11. Those are facts. It's okay to say there's 4 games under 500. They got work to do. And it's also okay to cite where they are in a playoff race. Because here's the ultimate truth. And I've said this a million times. I would rather make the playoffs with 82 wins than miss the playoffs with 87 wins. We all agree with that? I mean, I don't think that's a debatable statement, by the way. Like, I think that's an obvious statement. If you go back to, what year should I pick? Let me look it up. I'm going to go with 2019. Remember 2019? 2019 New York Mets? That was the year in which Mickey Callaway was the manager, yes. They had a ton of games that they blew. I mean, that when I think of 2019, all I could think of is the amount of games they blew that season. They blew so many freaking games. Well, at the end of the day, they missed the playoffs. They won 86 games. Okay? 86. The Washington Nationals won 93 games. They were a wild card team. They were a wild card team number 1. Won the wild card game. They won the World Series. But the Mets won 86 games. If in 2019 they had 3 wild card spots, the Mets would have been the 3rd wild card team. Okay? But there wasn't. Would I rather win 86 games and not make the playoffs like the 2019 team, or win 81 games or 82 games and make the playoffs? I'd rather make the playoffs. That's the goal. We're fans. We want to dream. We want to see our team play October baseball. So while I agree they still have to get to 500 and they've got work to do, it's okay to look at the standings. It's okay to see where they are. They're still trailing everybody. They still have to jump everybody. But the reason that's not as daunting as people like to make out is if you win your games, you're naturally going to jump teams. But here's the other really important thing in this day and age, 2024, with this format that we have, with 3 wild cards, with 2 of them being 500 teams right now. The other thing that's really, really important is tiebreakers, because there are no more 1-game playoffs. If you finish tied for the 3rd wild card spot, there will be a tiebreaker that will determine if you're in the playoffs or not. It matters. It's like the NFL. It's kind of like the NBA. Tiebreakers matter. So when you are facing a team that you may finish tied with, that you may be battling for one of these wild card spots, it's important to beat them, because season series will determine if you are going to be above them or if you're going to be behind them. So let's play a game. Let's take a look at all of these teams that the Mets are competing with. And we'll take the Phillies and Braves aside. We'll put the Brewers aside. We'll put the Dodgers aside, because at least for now, Things can change, but at least for now, those are not teams you're realistically thinking about. Despite the Mets continuing to gain ground in the National League East, I don't think any of us are delusional enough to think they're catching Philadelphia, so we put that aside. Despite the Atlanta Braves' struggles, and they have been struggling, no doubt, they are now 38-31. So the Mets are only 6 games behind Atlanta in the loss column. I think if we're all being honest with ourselves, odds are the Mets are not catching Atlanta. So let's just put them aside. So you got all these other National League teams, the Washington Nationals, who are 35-36. Well, the Mets have swept them 3-0. They still have 10 more games against them, a lot to be determined, but so far so good when you look at the tiebreaker. The St. Louis Cardinals, that's a team you got to keep an eye on. They're 35-35. They're technically one of the wild card teams. Well, the Mets lost 2 out of 3 to St. Louis at City, but they won 2 in St. Louis. So as of right now, they're 3-2 against the Cardinals, and there's one makeup game that's coming in a few months. You win that game, tiebreaker goes to the New York Mets. The Cincinnati Reds, the Mets went to Cincinnati. They won 2 out of 3. So far, so good. They'll play them in September, but so far, Mets have the edge, 2-1 on the tiebreaker. This is fun, isn't it? The Pittsburgh Pirates. Mets swept the Pittsburgh Pirates 3-0. They go to Pittsburgh real soon. We'll see if they can get one more win and assure themselves a tiebreak over Pittsburgh. So far, so good. The Chicago Cubbies. The Mets played 4 games against the Cubs at City. They split them 2-2, which means next weekend, that's coming up at Wrigley Field. That series will determine the tiebreaker. If the Mets win the series, tiebreaker. If the Mets lose the series, Cubs get the tiebreaker. Now, keep this in mind. We have just gone through the entire National League Central and one bit of the National League East. The Mets have the tiebreak edge on almost every team we mentioned. Now we get to the San Diego Padres. Hey, we just saw what happened. The Mets went 3-0 against them. They'll go to San Diego in a few months. They have 4 games. If they win 1 game in San Diego, the Mets have the tiebreaker. Now we have the Arizona Diamondbacks. Mets played them 4 times at City. They got a split 2-2, which means when the Mets go to Arizona, that series will determine the tiebreaker. The Giants, not good. That's the one team, as we went through all of this, where no tiebreaker for the New York Mets. They lost 2 out of 3 in San Francisco. They lost 2 out of 3 at City. Tiebreaker goes to the Giants. So here's what I'm telling you. And this is not to get you pumped up. I'm not trying to talk you into a wild card spot. I'm just going through the facts because sometimes we don't think about this crap. It's June. Maybe you shouldn't think about this crap. But on the Rico, we think about this crap. The Mets have a chance to own almost all of the tiebreakers with the teams that are competing with in the National League outside of the Giants. They've got a leg up on a lot of those tiebreakers, like I mentioned. And that matters. So that's why, and we'll spend more time on it next week, that 3-game series in Chicago is a big deal. It's a big deal. Now, the Cubs have struggled. They've dropped to 4 games under 500, but this wild card race is so fluid. And the thing that should encourage you, and I'm not sure if the Mets are going to take off or not. Okay, so if the ultimate question is, hey, Evan, do you think the Mets are just going to continue this run into the All-Star break and they're going to win 88 games? I'm not bursting with that kind of confidence. I know as a baseball fan that when you're bad, you're usually not as bad as the way you're playing. And when you're good, you're not as good as the way you're playing. So having that even-keeled attitude through losing streaks and even through winning streaks would not make me think they're on their way to 90 wins. But I do think when you look at the National League and the teams I just mentioned, after you get past Philly, Atlanta, Milwaukee, and LA, and I'm just putting Milwaukee there for now. They have a nice lead in the division, but I'm certainly not counting the Cardinals out. There is a lot of bad to mediocrity. And I think when you look at St. Louis and Cincinnati, Pittsburgh, Chicago, San Diego, Arizona, San Francisco, and yes, the Mets and the Nationals, there's a lot can change over the next few weeks and months. So we have still not identified who are really the teams in the pennant race. But as of right now, the Mets are one of them. And they got to keep winning. And they've got to continue to put that dent in being under 500. Now, I will tell you a roster move that I would love to see the Mets move and make over the next couple of days and why it makes so much sense. But let's listen to a couple of voicemails. We love hearing your voicemails. The number where you can leave us one is 725-222-8699. That's the number. 725-222-8699. And good or bad, you're always welcome to leave us a voicemail. So Peter, Jefferson, Martinez, Aloysius, Hoffman, do you have a voicemail for us to listen to?
I have a couple of them. So let's start with Saturday. Here we go.
Hey, Evan. Hey, Hoff. It's Oregon's Oregon's biggest man, Michael. Remember right before spring training, you said you give me one more bat, and that one more bat is JD Martinez, and now you feel like he's settled in. The bullpen's better. The vibes are better. There's more confidence. The defense is better. I'm not saying we'll go to the World Series, but you know what? Starting now, these games officially matter, my friend. So J.D. Martinez, thank you. Garrett, thank you. Quintana, way to step it up. Nimmo looked good. Lindor's more like himself. Let's go, Mets.
I did beg for one more bat. And Pete was begging for JD Martinez for the last 2 or 3 years. Look, it's not to regurgitate any old arguments or debates. The bottom line was adding JD Martinez made the lineup better. And it was frustrating early in the season because he wasn't playing. Like, he wasn't around. He needed time down in Florida and down in, rehab assignments. And then he had his, kind of setbacks, if you will. It took a while, and then once he got here, it took a while to heat up. But now we are seeing why adding JD Martinez was such an important move. And look, it's a win-win, because if things don't go well, right now we're on a high. The Mets have played well, 9 out of 11, 5-1 homestand. But if things don't go well, you can trade them. Not suggesting that they do that. We have a lot of time before those kinds of decisions need to be made. But that's the win-win scenario of signing a guy like JD Martinez. So I'm glad they did it. He had a very, very big impact on winning. What is this homestand if JD Martinez is not in the middle of the lineup? I'll tell you this right now, it's not 5-1.
Who's more of an impact? Him, Francisco Alvarez, who's made his return. If you look at the number with Francisco Alvarez when he's playing, they're pretty good, or Grimace making that first pitch.
Well, Grimace is going to get all the credit. It's funny. I've done this 2 weeks in a row now where I put a poll out on social media and I say, what has turned the Mets season around? And I always have the option, they still suck. Like, for anyone who says, well, they haven't turned it around. They're under 500. They're not any good. And that continues to win every single time. They have not turned it around. But the latest one I put out included me shaving my beard, which is not getting any love. And that's okay. I mean, they did go 1-5 right after I shaved it. That's the problem. Like, they went out, they blew a game against the Giants that night. They lost 2 out of 3, and they got swept by the Dodgers. So even though I could tell you right now, hey, the Mets are 10-7 since I shaved my beard, that may be factually true, but I have to include the fact they started it off 1-5. The team meeting, which is also getting a lot of attention because they have played better since the team meeting, and then Grimace showing up. Maybe it's a combination of the team meeting and Grimace. Maybe you needed those two factors to come together, and somehow that's gotten the season going. But if the Mets go anywhere, I'm not saying they're going to win the World Series by any stretch, but this does become a season in which they're in the playoffs, which for us is a rarity. It's not like we're in the playoffs all the time. There is no doubt that much like Bobby Valentine's coaches being fired at Yankee Stadium in 1999, this would be the line of demarcation. It would be the Jorge Lopez glove throwing / team meeting. There is no doubt that is the moment you can look at and you see a difference. I mean, they won the first 2 games against Arizona despite losing the next 2. They sweep the Nationals. They get a split in Philadelphia or in London against the Phillies. They respond by winning 2 out of 3 against the Marlins and obviously sweeping San Diego. So there's no doubt that the team meeting will win this poll in the long run, because if this season has turned, if what we're witnessing is reality, then that's it. I can tell you right now, history will give that credit. Then again, maybe the rally Grimace becomes a thing. Who knows?
Listen, it's better than the Met Pimp, right? I mean, I think if we have to take Grimace or Met Pimp, Grimace is the way to go. So
yeah, I don't know. That's actually a close one.
All right, here's a voicemail number 2 from earlier. I think it was the 8th inning when maybe things got a little shaky.
Hey guys, this is Jeff from Raleigh. Just calling here in the middle of the 8th as Drew Smith managed somehow to strike out Fernando Tatis Jr. watching a 7-6 game on Sunday against the Padres when all but 10 minutes ago the game was 7-2. I will tell you, if the Mets lose this game, even though, if they do lose, it's okay because they just won 2 out of 3. That's fine. I get it. But when you're up 7-2, okay, and you had McGill pitch very well for 5 innings, and then you have Hauser pitching very well, why would Mendoza ever take out Adrian Hauser? The guy is stretched out to pitch 90 to 100 pitches. What is he doing? He's overused his bullpen so much all season, and now you have a chance to rest everybody going into another 3 games with Texas. Okay? If the Mets lose this game, I can blame one person, and that is Carlos Mendoza for overmanaging this game. And I don't personally have too much against Mendoza, but I feel like the moves he makes are more negative than positive when he makes moves in a baseball game. Not that he doesn't have control of the locker room, things like that, and he isn't a good manager. I'm not saying that. It's just I feel like there's better baseball managers out there.
Well, here's the good news, Jeff and Raleigh. They didn't lose the game because I do agree with this, all right? Expectations change, and I'll use the comparison of 8-4. Going into this 12-game stretch, get me 8-4. That was my goal. Well, at 5-1, are we still okay with 8-4? Or do you kind of change the bar? When you have a 7-1 lead and eventually a 7-2 lead going into the 8th inning of this game, you can't lose that game. You can't lose that game and then say, well, we won 2 out of 3. You would have taken 2 out of 3. Absolutely not. Can I give you a really extreme example? So we're sitting here in the middle of June, okay? June 16th, June 17th, depending on when you're listening or viewing. The Mets are 4 games under 500. If I told you right now, the Mets are going to go to the World Series, we would all sign for it in a second, right? Like, oh, of course. Yes, dummy. Of course we'd sign for that. All right. Now let me give you this hypothetical. They're in the World Series, and they have a 3-1 series lead on the Seattle Mariners, right? And they blow the series. And they lose a heartbreaking 7th game in Seattle to the Mariners, and the Mariners win the World Series. Do you think I would come on the Rico and say, well, guys, we blew a 3-1 series lead. We lost the 7th game of the World Series. But hey, in the middle of June, we were 4 games under 500. We would have signed for it then. No. Expectations change. Now, that is a very extreme example, but it's also a preview that the Mets could make the playoffs. That doesn't mean I'm going to sit here and say mission accomplished, great. Who cares what happens next? I've never been that kind of sports fan. I will still be upset no matter how it ends. And I think most of us deep down will be. So those are extreme examples. But in the case of a game like this, when you're up 7-1, you better win. When you're up 7-2 in the 8th inning, you better win. And you can't walk away and say, well, we won 2 out of 3. You would have taken it coming into the series. Well, things changed. And I do think this upcoming stretch kind of fits that. They've got 3 games against the Texas Rangers. They've got 3 games against the Chicago Cubs. The Mets have been an above 500 road team. Both teams have been struggling, specifically Chicago. Really? We're going to be okay with 3-3? No. Go out there and win more series. The Mets have been on a great run. They have not lost a series since the Dodgers, since the rock bottom moment with the team meeting and the Jorge Lopez glove throwing. Keep building on it. Now, let me get to a roster move I'd make, and that involves Brett Beatty. Brett Beatty was sent down to AAA. He has been tearing it up since. I did not see how he did on Sunday. I guess I could check that as we're talking. But Brett Beatty was hitting like 571 since he was sent down. He has torn it up. He played a little bit of second base, not a lot, but a little bit of second base. And I think that it's clear that Brett Beatty has proven everything he needs to prove at AAA as an offensive player. So to me, the only positive of being in the minor leagues right now is continuing to learn second base. By the way, on Sunday, he was 0 for 4, dropping his batting average in AAA to 429 and his OPS to 1,217. By the way, Luis Angel Acuna played center field, 2 for 5, raised his average to 260, 682 OPS. So he is continuing to play well and bring his numbers up. But I think what I would do with Brett Beatty is this. I would send DJ Stewart down to AAA immediately, and I would recall Brett Beatty. And I would do that for 2 reasons. Number one, Brett Beatty can hit at the major leagues. Brett Beatty has proven he has conquered the offensive question at AAA. He now needs to prove he can hit the major leagues. Brett Beatty is a better offensive option than DJ Stewart. Is that a controversial statement? Can we all get behind that? Brett Beatty right now, considering his age, considering his potential, considering what he's done at AAA, and considering how DJ Stewart has done very little in the last month and a half, other than draw walks and have a really good eye and bitch and moan when a strike is called on him, and then politely ask CB Buckner, please wipe home plate because you're bad at your job. Brett Beatty is a better offensive option than DJ Stewart. Hopefully everybody can accept that. I'm sure some will argue. Have Jeff McNeil play a lot more outfield. Jeff McNeil has not hit. He's played fine defensively at second base. He's also proven he can be fine in the outfield. He is an outfielder too. That's the beauty. I guess the one left beauty of Jeff McNeil is his versatility. He did have a hit in Sunday's game, a little bloop double, but outside of that, he's done nothing. Did have a single on Saturday. Other than that, he's done nothing. Okay? So it's not like he is awoken, but you're not DFAing him, nor should they. So you send down DJ Stewart, you call up Brett Beatty. I play a little bit of Brett Beatty at second base, like a tiny bit. Like, sure, why not? Throw him out there. You have Jose Iglesias late in games, or even Jeff McNeil himself to come in for defense. McNeil is not completely benched because he can play left field on the days where you sit Bader or Nimmo, or play right field on the day you rest Starling Marte, which is pretty much once a week. And with Mark Vientos starting to cool off, could there be a game against the tough righty where you sit Vientos? I still want him out there the majority of the time, but Beatty can get a game at third base. So if Brett Beatty isn't going to learn the outfield, that's fine. Let Jeff McNeil go to the outfield and let Beatty pretty much serve in the role with more at-bats as DJ Stewart. DJ still has options. You are not losing him, and it allows you to give Beatty more opportunities to hit at the major league level, continue to give him that opportunity, learn second base. I get it. It's not ideal learning at the major league level. That's why it's not every day. And Jeff McNeil can take the one skill that he still has, which is the ability to bounce between second base, left field, and right field. That is what I would do tomorrow. DJ Stewart is 30. He's not a kid. Okay, I know he's got a wonderful eye, and he doesn't swing at pitches out of the strike zone. Great. He's hitting 180. He hasn't done anything in a long time. It's not like he's all-world defensively in the outfield. McNeil is a better defensive outfielder than DJ Stewart is. So when I've expressed my opinion on McNeil that you need to kind of reimagine him, you can't just think of him as the guy that won the batting title 2 years ago. You can't run him out there every day at second base. This is a part of it. This is a part of that. He's a guy who can play the outfield. He can serve that fourth outfield / start at second base once in a while role. And that solves the Beatty problem. Beatty up, DJ Stewart down. Hoff, you like it? Good idea.
I mean, I still don't think Beatty's ready yet. Listen, the DJ Stewart aspect, I'm kind of sick of seeing him get at bats. I get it. He seems like he's a quiet leader of this team. So maybe that's why they keep him around. I think he had a lot of the ass slap and stuff that he maybe started with, getting the team to rally behind that. He seems to talk a lot to the players on the bench, but I don't need to see him around. If it's going to be somebody, I guess it's got to be Beatty because they really want to see him back here. I wish there was somebody else that was performing, though. I know that nobody else really is right now. I know Clifford's been going off, but he's not ready. But I would like to see somebody else get an opportunity too, personally speaking.
Yeah, but I think we still need to figure out what the hell he is. You know what I mean? And the most important thing for Brett Beatty and
he's
what?
a 4A player. He's a 4A player. That's
Well,
what he is right now.
I don't know that fully. I mean, you may be right. I mean, there's certainly a lot of evidence to point towards that, but there's at least a place for him. Like, he's better than DJ Stewart. And, here's the other thing. We always hear guys got to play every day. All right? That's the only way. You got to see him every day. Mark Vientos was not given that treatment last year. He wasn't given that treatment until recently. Well, maybe it's time for Brett Beatty to get that treatment, where you're a major leaguer, bro. You're going to get your at-bats. It's not every day. And by the way, things can change so quickly. Look, Mark Vientos has won for his last 13. I'm not suggesting he be benched. I'm not suggesting he doesn't continue to get that opportunity at third base. But if you call Brett Beatty up in the role I described, and he's hitting a ton, and Vientos is not hitting a ton, that can change too. Like, that competition that we talk about can change. I just think DJ Stewart continues to be a waste. And also, Jeff McNeil cannot play every day at second base. And Carlos Mendoza, 5 consecutive games now, 5 in a row. One against the lefty in Braxton Garrett, mainly because they were facing lefties every day, and he wanted to get McNeil back out there, fine. But then he starts Thursday, he starts Friday, he starts Saturday, he starts Sunday. And he did very little. He had a couple of blue pits, great. So it allows Beatty to move into that rotation of playing second base every once in a while. So McNeil isn't given that he has to start against every freaking righty, which essentially is what Carlos Mendoza has done. So it creates opportunities for Beatty to get at-bats and for us to continue to evaluate on what he is.
We're moving a lot for Brett Beatty. And I understand he's still a rookie or he's still a young kid, so we want to see him and I want to evaluate him. But it seems like the Mets, and you, rightfully so, it's fine, are going above and beyond to really give this guy playing time.
No, I'm going above and beyond because DJ Stewart and Jeff McNeil stink. Can we not leave that part out? It's not as if I'm benching somebody who's hitting 310. It's offering other possibilities. Like, the Mets have been winning lately, and that's great. It's not as if Jeff McNeil looks like batting title Jeff McNeil again.
I'd stick with Jose Iglesias. The guy has been better than advertised. He has a hunger to be in the game and play.
Well, let's see how they use Iglesias. So coming up against Texas, they're facing 2 more righties in a row. So if they continue to play McNeil against every right-handed starting pitcher, that would make it 7 consecutive starts. They're facing John Gray on Monday. They're facing Michael Lorenzen on Tuesday. And then they finally get a lefty again. Andrew Haney is going to pitch the Wednesday night game. So let's see what Mendy does. If he does give Iglesias that opportunity against the right-hand pitcher. I don't think he will. Like, I think McNeil's starting Monday and Tuesday, and then Iglesias will start Wednesday. We'll try to look ahead in a couple of days to see what Chicago has lined up for the 3 games in Chicago. But it's David Peterson and John Gray on Monday, Luis Severino and Michael Lorenzen on Tuesday, and then Sean Manaea and Andrew Haney on Wednesday. 3 games, 3 night games in Texas, off day on Thursday, and then a Friday afternoon against the Cubbies, which is traditional, a Saturday afternoon, and then, yay, Sunday Night Baseball. We made it. We made it back. The Mets and the Cubs in Sunday Night Baseball. So a very interesting 6-game road trip coming up.
Evan, I know we've been doing this podcast. You've been almost an hour, but I have a couple questions that I've been building up since this past 5-game winning streak and whatnot. First of all, I think this is more simplistic and it's a little sarcastic, but I don't really care. Does Francisco Lindor and Pete Alonso's home runs mean anything after today? I mean, they hit it in the first inning. They would have won the game without those 4 runs. So do they mean anything at this point in time? I mean, we're 4 games behind. Does it really mean anything that they're hitting productive home runs?
Why do you get bothered by stupid arguments?
I hate people.
Listen, man, I was arguing. I forget what it was about specifically, but I was arguing on the air a couple of days ago. It may have been with Sean. It may have been with Loogie. It may have been with Tiki. And I said, sometimes we get so set in what we're trying to prove that we make an argument that only includes the stuff we want to include. And by the way, I'm guilty of that too, right? We all are. But then you try to look at things fairly. And sometimes fairly isn't as sexy. Sometimes fairly you get bogged down in things. Like Pete Alonso has not had a great season, right? I'll be the first to tell you. Pete Alonso has not had a clutch season. But minimizing every home run a guy hits by saying that's not clutch, I don't count that, is crazy. Like, it's just crazy. Like, has Pete Alonso had a really clutch season? Not really. But has he had some clutch moments? Of course. Same thing with Francisco Lindor. So don't get caught in those arguments. Don't get bothered by things that just don't mean anything. Look, Francisco Lindor needs to get hot now. Pete Alonso needs to get hot now because the season is not over. The Mets were not buried by their bad May. So if they play well now, it still matters. Yes, it matters. And I thought Lindor's home run on Sunday was huge. You're down 1-0. It against a very good starting pitcher in Dylan Cease, and you immediately, it's even. Pete Alonso immediately hits that 3-run home run. Now you've jumped on quality pitcher. And that's why late and close, high leverage, like, they're misleading. Sometimes you just got to watch a game and you got to watch a team. And I think anyone that watched Sunday's game would tell you that even though it was the first inning, even though the Mets scored 11 runs, those were two pivotal moments, yes, early in a baseball game.
All right, and final one for you. This is I don't know if you can answer it today, so maybe we sit on this. But it's 4 games under 500. We're getting closer to that wild card position. Trade deadline is about a month and a half away. I think, my opinion, David Stearns had an agenda going into the season anyway. He was locked and loaded on trying to remake this team. I don't think it was a rebuild. I think it was remaking. But come the deadline, if we are going in the right direction, where we were talking about sell McNeil, sell this guy, sell that guy, is it going to change his philosophy, you think?
Well, I don't know what he's going to do. I can only tell you what I would do. Number one, and I think I remember saying this during the offseason, so long before we saw this season play out, and I certainly went into the season with confidence. I thought this would be a quality baseball team. I thought they would win in the mid to high 80s. I thought they would be a playoff team. But even with those expectations, I never wanted the Mets to be a bye team. And we had those arguments. Like, I don't think they're set up to be a bye team. So to answer that end of it, I don't see a scenario, just me, where I'm going to be screaming and yelling on the Rico or on WFAN for the Mets to buy. Like, I don't think that's likely to happen. I think the way things are setting up right now is if you're in a pennant race, you have as of right now, things can obviously change. The Mets have a surplus. I can't believe I'm saying this, but it's true. The Mets have a surplus of starting pitching to the point where there are guys in this rotation that I would prefer not be in the rotation because I want to see Jose Budo, because I want to see Christian Scott, because Kodai Senga may come back. Those are 3 guys I just mentioned. And that doesn't even include Blake Tidwell, who could be up here soon too. So I think the Mets are in a position where if the right deal is out there, even in a pennant race, that trading Sean Manaea is not a bad thing. That trading Jose Quintana is not a bad thing. Severino is going to be a little bit more complicated because I think we as Met fans have liked him more. He's been better. But even Luis Severino, like, I wouldn't put my arms off of them and say I can't trade them. Now, I want to make this very, very clear about Starling Marte because I think that's an important one. Starling Marte has hit, right? And so this could present one of 2 options. Number one, wait a second, his value's good now. The Mets should trade him. He's got this year, he's got next year, but he's proving he can hit. Maybe a team would take him. Here's the way I view that. If trading Starling Marte is simply getting rid of his salary, and a team looks at his salary and says, you know what, we'd absorb that. He's a productive player. I'm not making a trade just to save me money. Jeff Wilpon doesn't own this team. Okay? So if the argument of his value's up, which I'm a big value up kind of guy, I would only do that for players, for prospects, not for money. And I don't know if Marte has done enough to where a team would cover his money and then B, you'd get prospects back. But if Marte's value was that high, I think it's a worthy discussion, even in a pennant race, to say, boy, he's in his 30s. He's always hurt. Man, doesn't it make sense to cash out? I'd consider it. I'd be the first to tell you. I know it'd be tough. It'd make your team worse. It makes making the playoffs tougher, but I want to be smart. But if that's only to save money, get the F out with that. I ain't interested in that.
What if, and I only say this because I'm not talking World Series. I'm not. But there's always that hope. There's always that, wow, the team is really taking the step in the direction they needed. and you've seen teams just recently in the local teams with the Rangers and the Knicks, the Mets in 2022, they make the playoffs, but they didn't do anything more than a Darren Ruff and a Daniel Vogelback. Would you dare trade any young player? If you no,
probably not, unless you're getting.
You never know. You never know what you.
No, I know. I'm definitely a big you never know guy. I'd rather play the you never know game with my own guys than play you the never know game with trading prospects. You know what I mean? Like, I think that 2022 is far different. You had a 100 win team, and it was certainly worthy of the debate of how far into you want to go on a team that's trying to be the third wild card team with the way they're built. The only additions I would make are additions that can help me in the future. So if Luis Robert is a guy you're targeting, and I'm not saying specifically him because the White Sox are asking for a ton. He's had a bad year. I get all that. I'm just trying to use an example of a guy that is more than just a rental. Then it's worthy of a discussion. But in your traditional rental sense, it doesn't make a lot of sense. And also keep this in mind. Who's selling in the National League? Other than Colorado and Miami, everybody's in it. If the Mets are in it, then everybody's in it. So I wonder what the sell market would even look like. But we obviously have a lot of time to get into that as we get closer to the trade deadline. Right now, the focus is Texas and then eventually Chicago. 6 big games coming up, 5-1 homestand, a great homestand. And again, whether you want to be fully sucked in, partially sucked in, 5% sucked in, or you still think they're terrible, enjoy the fact that you got to watch your baseball team win 3 in a row against the Padres and 5 in a row overall. Sometimes it's just fun to watch your baseball team win, and we got that. Thank you very much for listening and downloading another edition of the Rico Brogna.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Rico Brogna podcast. It's amazing, isn't it? Make sure you download it now to keep it on you at all times.